Maybe this is the weekend that spring finally arrives. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, two new saints, Pope John the 26th and John Paul II, are canonized in Rome. Milwaukee's Archbishop Jerome Listecki was on hand. Emails revive the controversy over American deaths in Benghazi, and the House forms a new special committee. A police shooting leaves a man dead in downtown Milwaukee. Tensions continue to rise as Russia moves on Ukraine. In the courts, a federal judge throws out Wisconsin's voter ID bill, and another blow to the prosecutors in the John Doe probe that is targeting conservative groups. A federal judge refuses to stop a civil rights lawsuit against the prosecutors, including Milwaukee DA John Chisholm. Republicans gather in Milwaukee for their state convention amid controversy over a resolution endorsing secession and nullification. And the Brewers lose a few, but continue to have the best record in baseball. But first, we start with a scandal in the NBA. By now, you know all the details. An 80-year-old owner of the Los Angeles Clippers caught on tape during a conversation with his ex-girlfriend making racist comments. Reaction was swift and dramatic. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver hits Donald Sterling with a lifetime ban, a $2.5 million fine, and the owners may force the sale of the team. But there are questions. Was the tape a violation of privacy? And why did the NBA ignore Sterling's long and well-documented history of racism, including a federal lawsuit that he had discriminated against minorities in his real estate business? And why had the NAACP given Sterling not one, but two Lifetime Achievement Awards? Joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Michael Holt, former State Representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Linda Bruin, and media trackers Brian Sickman. Did the NBA get it right, Michael Holt?
Yeah, they get it right, but, you know, deep down inside, I'm thinking to myself, they're going to force him to sell a team after a little bit of a fight. He bought the team for $12 million, and he's going to laugh all the way to the bank because they're going to pay him $500 million.
Hey, get with the program. He's going to sell that for about $1 billion. If the Milwaukee Bucks are worth $550, how much do you think a Los Angeles team is going to be worth?
But, you know, and then, too, you know, there is a culture in America. How many of these NBA owners have sat over the last 10 years and listened to these racist rants from this guy and not said a single word? When they asked the commissioner about that, you know, his history, etc., he said something flippant like, well, we're not dealing with the past. You have to deal with the past in order to know what you're going to do in the future.
I raised the question of the NAACP. The NAACP had given him
It was about money. Let's be honest with it. The black community by itself does not provide enough income through contributions for the NAACP. I think the president of the L.A. branch of the NAACP should be fired, thrown out of office. It's ridiculous.
Okay, Michelle Litchens, did the NBA get it right?
You know, they might have gotten it right on this. And what he said is obviously apprehensible, and we shouldn't accept it at all. But I think we actually have to kind of move beyond that and start talking about the real issue here. Is what we say in private going to cost us our business in the future? Is the thought police out there so prevalent? Are we living in 1984 where we have microphones everywhere? No matter what we say to someone in private, that can be made public and that can cost us.
Did you say the same thing when Jesse Jackson made that infamous statement about Jews? How many times? Were you saying the same thing?
I'd say the same thing about anything.
Was it an airplane? No, well, let's ask this question. I mean, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I think, had one of the most thoughtful pieces on this, where he said, look, I'm not defending this guy. This guy's the villain in the piece. But we ought to be a little bit concerned about a private phone conversation that may have been illegally taped. And the media apparently has no problems whatsoever in broadcasting that. Anything to be disturbed about that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if he was a completely private citizen, that'd be one thing. But he is in a very prominent national role. He's not an elected politician elected politicians, I think, can't assume that anything they say, private or not, that is going to stay private. And that's just the fact of life. But given the type of role that he's in, I do think that the rules, the privacy issues should be a little bit more lax with someone like him, and I don't have a problem that it got out.
Okay, Brian Sickman.
Well, I certainly have share the concerns about privacy privacy being violated. I disagree with Lynn in the fact that just because he's a prominent citizen doesn't mean he doesn't have a right to privacy, and there are concerns about the legality and the propriety of the tape. But his views on race do represent a disturbing throwback to the past nobody really in their sane mind wants to return to. I think now the public outrage has forced the NAACP and others to stop whitewashing this guy's record. The NBA has to look at this now. They're confronted with it, whether the tape was valid or not. They're now confronted with something they knew all along, and now the rest of us get to see Donald Sterling for who he is.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Going back to the whole question of why now? Because, you know, for years and years, I think everybody pretty much knew who Donald Sterling was. There was a long track record. He had to pay millions of dollars in fines for the lawsuit by the Department of Justice. Elgin Baylor had filed a suit against him for being a racist. But it's only when he's on TMZ making a comment about his girlfriend having a picture with Magic Johnson that suddenly everybody goes, okay, well, now you've crossed the line. When you were discriminating against poor minorities, we didn't see a thing. I think the hypocrisy here was rather dramatic. But, you know, I think the NBA did the right thing because I don't think they had a choice. I think that in order to protect the brand, in order to protect, they had a PR crisis, they had a human relations crisis with the players. They were shedding sponsors. They were they were being hit in the pocketbook. I don't think that Adam Silver had an alternative. But I also think that the owners really have to ask themselves, where are they going on this? You know, the next time an owner is having an intimate conversation with a family member or a loved one and they express opposition to gay marriage and somebody leaks that, is that going to cause is that going to force them out of the game? Are they going to be forced to sell their team? I don't know. So what is your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, I'm staying with the same subject. My glass is half full because the LA branch of the NAACP withdrew its Lifetime Achievement Award to Donald Sterling. But it's half empty because the civil rights organization permanently tarnished its reputation by giving that well-known racist a previous award and for trying to justify this latest one.
Michelle Litchens.
Well, it's half full because we finally have a smoking gun, a Benghazi email from the White House. It is half empty because I don't know if Americans are going to stop watching Dancing with the Stars long enough to pay attention.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because the new NBA commissioner handed down the strongest punishment ever given to an owner when he banned Donald Sterling for life. But my glass is half empty because the $2.5 million fine won't be much of a hardship given that Sterling is currently worth almost $2 billion.
Brian Sikma.
Well, my glass is half full because the Milwaukee County District Attorney is investigating an incident in the 15th Aldermanic District where supporters of a liberal candidate bought meals for voters. But my glass is half empty, though, because the DA's office has a history of excusing this type of conduct when it involves liberals.
Well, my glass is half full because the unemployment rate on Friday dropped to 6.3%. It's half empty because there are now more than 92.5 million Americans out of the workforce altogether, a million more than the previous month, and an all-time record. Next on Sunday Insight, did a Milwaukee County supervisor use tax dollars for his campaign?
Wisconsin.
Questions for a Milwaukee County supervisor who wants to be a state legislator. Supervisor John Weishan spent $4,700 in taxpayer dollars to send out a mailing to residents who did not live in his district. Many of them didn't even live in Milwaukee County, but the letter, which attacked State Representative Joe Sanfilippo's support for reforming Milwaukee's mental health system, went to residents of Sanfilippo's Assembly District. Shortly afterward, Weishan, a Democrat, filed papers to run for that Assembly seat against Sanfilippo, who's a Republican. Well, that raises the obvious question. Did Weishan use county tax dollars to pave the way for his campaign, and was that legal? Weishan's been an outspoken supporter of the John Doe probes that targeted the use of county resources for political purposes. Isn't that exactly what he did here, Linda Bruin?
You know, technically, and he did check with Corporation Counsel, so technically it probably wasn't illegal and it probably didn't violate any county ethics standards. On the other hand, I was a supervisor for 20 years and I never once saw heard of a supervisor mailing outside of Milwaukee County. But I think, and I got to say, I'm a good friend of John Weishan's, and I like him a lot. He's a feisty guy and an honorable guy. But I also like Joe Sanfilippo, and Sanfilippo had every right to be furious over this letter because the content of the letter is what really bothered me. He used some very negative baiting fear tactics to scare residents to oppose the Sanfilippo bill, which, by the way, I strongly supported. So, you know, I want people to know that John Weishan's a good guy and an honorable guy, but he's much better than this letter.
Actually, John Weishan is a hack, he's a phony, and he's a hypocrite, but that's just me. It's Brian Sickman.
No, I think that, as Lynn mentioned, he did check with Corporation Counsel, but I'd be very interested to know if he did check with Corporation Counsel saying, hey, I'm going to announce for assembly here in a couple of weeks, does this have any impact on that? The Government Accountability Board has looked at instances like this in the past of candidates using official resources, because there is that question of an incumbent, when you not become an incumbent and become a candidate. And their test is a proximate test. It's really something that attorneys are going to have to figure out. But I do think there's a very solid argument to be made, as Rick Essenberg pointed out in Wright, Wisconsin this week, that John Weishan did something that he's been criticizing Republicans for doing, when in fact there's been no evidence that Governor Scott Walker ever did that, even though John Weishan was one of the attack dogs.
I mean, there have been people who have been charged with felonies for, you know, sitting in a county building and making phone calls or sending emails.
Right.
Here's a guy who basically, you know, ripped off $4,700 worth of taxpayer money to send out a mailing to an assembly district he was about to run for office in. Michael Holt.
Yeah, and I empathize with Lynn because she's friends with the guy. But this is so obvious and so blatant. I don't even know how it could be construed as being legal. I mean, it's not his district. You know, and that's what I thought the money was for, to inform his constituents. The bill is passed, and his opposition to the bill is ridiculous.
Okay.
Yeah,
Linda.
I completely agree. I think that the council gave him the wrong answer, especially, no one would be talking about this if he wasn't running for the state assembly, if he just wanted to criticize Jocelyn Filippo. Outside of Milwaukee County, I think we all would have said it's a waste of taxpayer dollars, but he was campaigning with Milwaukee County taxpayer dollars. That is illegal, and hopefully the district...
and this is where you got to get... The problem with this is there's the technical stuff, which is what you deal with the legal issues, and then there's the moral or the philosophical, and you guys are talking on philosophical.
Also,
I was talking technically and legally.
And you know what?
Probably safe.
You may be right that there might not be a technical violation, but given, you know, his position on the John Doe, I think he's a hypocrite. But also how weird it is that he chose this issue to go after a mental health reform bill that was passed by the Senate unanimously. Only one vote in the state assembly. He's on the wrong side of that issue too. Now you may not want to hear it, but we'll tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you're first.
To Attorney General Van Hollen. Don't waste any more taxpayer money trying to defend the indefensible voting ID bill.
Michelle Hitchens.
To Brett Halsey, you are onto something. You should go to every Mary Burke event that she's at and call her a chicken for not debating you.
Linda Bruin.
U.S. Representative Michael Grimm of New York has been charged with 20 federal counts of mail and wire fraud, filing false tax forms, and perjury. The Republican says he'll stay in office and run for re-election in November, but Grimm should get out of politics and focus on his legal troubles.
Brian Sickman.
Well, my advice is for Dr. Ben Carson, who addressed a packed house at the annual Wisconsin Right to Life dinner on Thursday night. Keep doing what you're doing. Your story of hard work, faith, and perseverance is an inspiration to many.
Well, my advice is that if you're an 80-year-old NBA owner and your much younger girlfriend wants to talk on the cell phone about your ideas on race, don't. Hang up. Next on Sunday Insight, a federal judge throws out Wisconsin's voter ID law. Will it be back in time for the November election? A federal judge throws out Wisconsin's voter ID law, saying that it violated the U.S. Constitution. Another challenge is still pending in the state Supreme Court, and appeals are promised. Now, states all across the country have adopted the IDs, and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of Indiana's law. But what happens now here? What are the chances, Brian Sickman, that we'll have voter ID by this November's election?
Well, maybe it's a question for the Republican State Senate right now, because Governor Walker said he wants to see reforms passed. The Assembly have already passed reforms to the voter ID bill, and the reforms we're talking about would take away a lot of the reasoning that Judge Lynn Edelman used in his decision this week. Judge Edelman stepped down and handed the decision down, so this violates the several parts of the U.S. Constitution. But the U.S. Supreme Court, as you mentioned, has upheld Indiana's law, and these amendments that the Assembly has already passed, and they're just waiting on the Senate to act upon, would actually bring Wisconsin's law into a line with Indiana's law.
Here's my question. Knowing that the U.S. Supreme Court had upheld Indiana's law, why didn't Wisconsin just pass Indiana's law?
Well, because we like to be independent here in Wisconsin. We like to come up with new ideas. I think in this case, a new idea went a little too far.
Okay, I can't imagine what you're going to say, Michael. I can't guess.
You know, this is I said this repeatedly. This is a solution looking for a problem. And what the court said was there is no significant evidence of any kind of voter fraud. So why do we have this? It's pretty obvious why we have this. It's to put another barrier when this country, this state, should be doing everything possible to make voting easier. We're throwing out these restrictions.
Shouldn't we be doing everything possible to make sure that everybody has IDs so they can participate in the economy and civil society? I mean, I actually thought that Bill Clinton made a great point saying, isn't there some middle ground here where we can have an ID so that make sure that the people who need to cash checks or fly in an airplane or go into a federal building have access to that? I never hear, you know, people who complain about voter IDs complain about all the other stuff you cannot do in this culture without an ID.
But this is our constitutional right, our constitutional obligation to
But you have the
participate in
constitutional
this
right to
process.
federal government.
So is voter ID going to happen in Wisconsin this year?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's
Yeah.
going to be in place in time for November. But this is an issue. 80% of the voters, and the people in the state of Wisconsin, believe in the integrity of the system, and they want to require a photo ID in order to vote. This is something that people believe
They've
in
been
because
sold a
they
bill
want
of
Well,
goods.
look,
Okay.
I actually
Lynn.
support Clinton
Yeah.
saying I don't have a problem with reasonable voter ID as long as it ends up with free access to photo IDs for all sorts of
Yeah.
purposes. However, I do think you need to note the partisan nature of this. And in states across the country, both blue and red, that are solidly blue and solidly red, for example, Nebraska is a solid red state, and they just passed law last week signed by the Republican governor, passed by a Republican legislature, that expanded on Election Day voter registration. In states where they're solidly one camp or the other, they're expanding voting rights. It's only on states where one legislature is controlling and the state may go one way or the other that partisan politics limits the rights.
I think the reason why, and Michelle's pointing out that the majority of voters have always supported voter ID, and I think it's because from a common sense point of view, there are so many things you need an ID for, and I guess that's you know, and we also know this ideological denial that there's a problem with fraud. We know that there's welfare fraud. We know that there's identity theft fraud. We know that there's, you know, in almost any program you can imagine there's fraud, and yet we're supposed to believe, Michael Holt, that there's no such thing as voter fraud ever. That
As
it's a
Edelman
myth.
said, this would affect hundreds of thousands of people, and the impact would be greater than a few cases of voter fraud. If you deter people from voting, doesn't that have more of a negative impact?
But there's never any evidence that anybody's been deterred from
It's
voting.
just-
I mean,
it's-
you know.
no, Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
don't think there's any evidence that people have been deterred
I
from voting.
have
And there
been.
are over
I
20
have
states
been.
require a photo ID right now to vote.
I
It's been
have
upheld
been.
by the
I've been
U.S.
denied
Supreme
the right
Court.
to vote.
I think Wisconsin's going to come back
Okay,
next year.
I
and
think
fix
the
it.
chances are, on a scale of 1 to 100, that they will have a voter ID in time to vote. I think it is a 1. Is what they said this week the same as what you heard? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
Emerging from a meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus, Representative Paul Ryan said the status quo policies addressing poverty have not worked. I agree. What I think I heard, though, was a starting point for both the left and the right.
Michelle Litchens.
Well, last week's MTV poll of millennials found 75% of whites and 65% of non-whites agreed it is wrong to give preferential treatment to someone of one race over another, regardless of past inequalities. What I heard was a call from today's students at universities to end affirmative action.
Linda Bruin.
Some Republicans have said it was the leftist national media who gave the racist rancher Cliven Bundy his national spotlight. But it was Fox News who mentioned Bundy 458 times in April before he made his racist comments, and Sean Hannity, the Tea Party, and Republican officials who made him a folk hero. So what I heard was Republicans deflecting the blame for Bundy onto their favorite fall guy, the leftist media.
Brian Sikma.
Well, Deputy State Treasurer Scott Felt is running for the job of state treasurer, and on Monday he said he would not be taking a leave of absence from his state government while running his campaign. Well, what I heard was Felt not wanting to lose that cushy taxpayer-funded salary he has as a government employee.
Well, Hillary Rodham Clinton said about Benghazi, at this point, what difference does it make? What I heard was that with these new emails and the creation of a select committee, that we might actually get an answer to her question, and she may not like it. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week, but first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
My winner, the federal court decision on the voter ID law is a major victory for the democratic process. The IDIAC law was at best a solution in need of a problem.
Michelle Litchens.
My winners are conservatives in Wisconsin with a huge right to life dinner Thursday and a successful Republican convention this weekend. Conservatives are excited and motivated about this November. The loser is Illinois. The latest Gallup poll says only 25% of Illinois residents like living there, and 49% of their residents, the highest in the country, would move if they could. Maybe it's finally bad enough for Illinoisans to vote Republican.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my winner is the Obama administration for their comprehensive efforts to reduce sexual assaults on college campuses. The administration has created Stop Sexual Assault television ads like the one that came out this week, started national online reporting, and they've linked the receipt of Title IX funds to a college's compliance with federal requirements on handling sexual assault complaints. My potential losers are the 55 colleges, including the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, who are currently under federal investigation over their handling of sexual violence complaints.
Brian Sikma.
Well, my winner this week is Aaron Rodriguez, a firefighter who writes for Right Wisconsin and blogs for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. In a case of citizen watchdog journalism, Rodriguez exposed the taxpayer-funded mailing by Supervisor Weishan and drew attention to an important issue. My loser is Federal District Judge Lynn Edelman, who this week struck down Wisconsin's common sense voter ID law. Edelman has a lot of controversy in his past. Just a couple of years ago, he tried to let a known neo-Nazi escape conviction and jail time despite the man's calls for the murder of one person and the assassination of President Barack Obama.
Well, my winner, it's still the Brewers. Franchise record 20 wins before May 1st, off to the best start on the road in 30 years. And one of, if not the best record in baseball. Loser, Donald Sterling. You're a jerk. You've been a jerk for decades. Now everybody knows it. Thanks for joining us for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.